My name is Tyler Thornton. I'm a client director at Ahead. We are a systems integrator, value-added reseller. Just recently, we merged 3 companies together: Sovereign Systems, Data Blue, and Ahead. Right, big presence within the Midwest, Southeast, and Northeast. Now, where I am in Dallas in the South. A little bit about Ahead, right? Overnight, the merger made us the #1 largest Dell Technologies reseller in the U.S. We did last year, fiscal year 19, $1.3 billion top line revenue across 60 different technology partners. Full range of professional services, right, for everything from strategy to operations, with our own dedicated consulting practices. We'll kind of talk through each practice next slide, right? In the last 2 years, we've done over 200 different cloud projects, 250 ServiceNow implementations, and 450 data center deployments. A little bit about the practices that we cover. We have an advisory practice, a cloud practice, data center infrastructure and networking, enterprise service management, and security. We also have our enterprise monitoring and analytics practice, led by Johnny Hatch. Johnny is one of the panelists today. Johnny, you want to kind of introduce yourself and explain kind of what your role is with the EM&A practice?
Yeah, so my name is Johnny Hatch. I'm the practice director for our enterprise monitoring and analytics practice. I'm really excited about today's session because it really speaks to the heart of what my practice is and does. And so I've got a team of pre-sales specialist engineers, as well as a team of post-sales implementation delivery experts that can actually go make monitoring pervasive across an enterprise environment. One of the fun things that I have about being in the role that I'm in within the broader scope of Ahead is I'm not coming in as just some unique little niche organization that does nothing but focus on monitoring and analytics, but yet I've got peers who manage and run these other practice areas that Tyler just alluded to. And that's critically important toward making monitoring meaningful within an organization. And so here's a couple examples that I like to give. I'll talk about inputs and outputs. Yeah, you got monitoring right there in the middle, but how is it that you go get it deployed? Well, we've got a team of DevOps experts and cloud experts that can go deploy monitoring agents as part of a CI/CD pipeline or bake it in as part of a service catalog. So now when you go in and say, yeah, hey, I want that LAMP stack, or I want these Windows systems, well, we can bake in monitoring agents into those deployments. So now every single release of an application, every single build of some infrastructure includes monitoring by default. And so now when you go back and say, boy, I really wish I had visibility or insight into that, well, it comes default. Once you make monitoring pervasive across an organization, you then have this notion of, well, how do I get alerted? What do I do with those alerts? That's where we've got an entire team focused around service management and ITSM. And so we have something to do with those events and alerts that get triggered, and hopefully we can leverage orchestration and automation to do something about them. So it's not a manual effort, but rather we can talk about auto remediation. And so it's going to be a lot of fun to take some of these concepts and principles and flesh them out in the world of baseball and hear firsthand how a pitcher in the big leagues is leveraging monitoring tools and analytics tools and visualizations to be able to inform his everyday decisions, both in real time in the game, as well as historically looking back and saying, all right, well, let's look at historical trends, both in terms of his personal performance, as well as how he reacts to other teams and other players and what's going on in the world around him.
And that's a great segue, Johnny. So I'm sure everyone's kind of wondering how we got this A-list celebrity star athlete on this little tiny webinar with Ahead. So I'd like to introduce Adam Ottavino. Me and Adam go back 15 years now, teammates at Northeastern University. And I use the term roommate lightly because I think technically you live with me, but you weren't actually part of our dorm. But Adam, thanks for hopping on, man.
Thanks a lot for having me, guys. Really appreciate it. Should be fun.
Cool. So yeah, let me kind of give a little background on Adam. who he is, where he come from. Right? As I said, right, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, attended Northeastern University, right? So pretty much every pitching record your junior year at Northeastern. Drafted 2006, 30th overall pick by the Cardinals. Worked his way through the minor league system with the Cardinals. Made your debut in 2010, I think it was, right, as a starting pitcher. Kind of went up and down between AAA for a couple of years, and then you got picked up with the Rockies in the Rule 5 draft. Was that, or did they sign as a free agent?
I was actually waived. I was put on waivers, and then I was claimed by the Rockies in April of 2012.
Yep. So started with the Rockies. Became their big league closer, right? The starting closer in 2014, I think it was. You were the starting closer.
Few saves at the end of 14, and then I was the full-time closer at the beginning of 15. Ended up getting hurt that year, but that was kind of the beginning of being in the back end.
And I think that's important, right, to kind of tell your story, right? So missed the entire year, right? Tommy John surgery, rehabbed all of 2015, came back 2016 as a setup man, right, with the Rockies. Lights out from there, and then just recently signed a 3-year deal last year with the New York Yankees. So kind of this, pretty cool story, right, from beginning to where you are now. And I think one of the cool things about you, right, just from knowing you, is how you've embraced analytics, right? It's kind of like part of your daily hygiene, and as you are as a player, right? I think now when you think baseball, it was sabermetrics, right? And start with Bill James. Now it's kind of evolved into the more technical analytics, right? And you were kind of almost an early adopter to analytics within baseball. And I think you're a great story to talk about how analytics has helped you, right? Not only as player development, right, but from competitiveness on the field, right, and how you break down and analyze all that data. So my kind of first question is, can you talk to me about like the evolution of how you use data analytics, right? Starting from high school when you're probably just like doing it and you're having someone watch you, to college where we use maybe the spray chart, or we filmed ourselves and use a TiVo, to minor leagues, to now what you're using professionally.
So, I feel like we've always had analytics in baseball. Statistics have always been a big part of the game, whether they be basic statistics, or the advanced ones that we have today. Even thinking back to college, I would set goals prior to the season in terms of how many strikeouts I wanted to have, what I wanted my ERA to be, because those are the things that were valued at the time. So it's one of those things where you realize, okay, like for me, I remember my freshman year in college, I had like 35 walks and I allowed like 35 runs. So then the next year, I think I had like 20 some odd walks and I allowed 20 some odd runs. So I saw a connection there. And that was at a very early point where I was like, hey, like the amount of free base runners I'm allowing really does dictate, the end result in terms of, runs that I'm allowing throughout the year. And obviously runs are the most important thing in the game. So that's where it starts. I mean, just like on a very basic statistical level, understanding those old school stats, looking at the paper, as a kid, and trying to track league leaders and understand like who's good and why are they good, right?
Yep.
And then I think, over time, you're trying in baseball, you're in a quest to get better constantly. Like your talent is kind of like a ball of clay, and then you have to mold that into something. And, I always had pretty good level of baseline, just raw physical ability. I'm a big guy. I threw pretty hard, have the ability to spin the ball very fast. But then it's like, who do you want to be out there? What kind of pitches do you want to throw? And where do you want to throw them, and why? And so, when I first got into pro ball, you kind of let your ability kind of play out, kind of go into it with a blindfold on and see how you stack up. And for me, I was kind of disappointed with it. By the time I got to AA, I really wasn't as effective as I wanted to be. And I was starved for information. At that time, the information was mostly coming from coaches, what they see, what they think, and your basic stat line. There was nothing that I could read into on a deeper level, and make some actionable change. So that's where it started, like where I was kind of at a necessity, like, I really have to improve, and since you can't focus on everything all at once, you're looking through these numbers to try to figure out where am I going to spend my energy in my practice sessions, to make, a couple percentage points difference in my ability the following year. And that's kind of how it's been going ever since. Now, data has kicked up a whole lot, and we can get into all of that. But I feel like for me, like once that light bulb kind of went off in my head, like, hey, I can be in charge of my own improvement by seeing my weaknesses, seeing my strengths, and kind of continuing to polish my strengths, but also narrow down on my weaknesses, and also paying attention to trends of other players. That's when I started, the light bulb, like I said, went off that, hey, I can really get incrementally better every year if I really pay attention to this data and, and take it to heart. So that's what I've done ever since. And every time I've hit a snag, I've been able to kind of give myself a software update and keep moving.
So we talk about the different types of data, right? There's competitive data, right? And there's player development data. Can you kind of explain the difference between the two types of data sets that you use and how you improve upon it?
So obviously when you're in competition, that's not the time necessarily to be tinkering and trying new things. Right. So, in the season, nowadays we get a ton of information from our analytics department basically on the other teams, and they try to blend the other teams, the other hitters' swings and what they do well and what they do not so well, blended against what I do well and not so well. So we get a breakdown, whether it be statistically and also in heat maps, of like, hey, this is a safe area for you to go against this hitter. And that type of information is very useful in competition because, you're trying to do a lot of calculus in your head really quickly on what to throw to each guy and in-game adjustments. And it's nice that you have a already threshed out, really, really sound statistical, people working behind the scenes to kind of, nudge you in the right direction. And so that's kind of what we focus on in the season. And then the player development side is kind of like, how are you going to get better when you're out of competition? That's when you can really take a step back and look at all like the components within your pitching, whether it be what pitches you're throwing, maybe there's an opportunity to add a new pitch that might make a difference, or there's something in the biomechanics of your delivery that could unlock a few more miles an hour or keep you a little more healthy. Literally, it's a rabbit hole that you can go down and, explore forever. But for me, I've been able to really make big strides in the off seasons. And I think that's been the biggest thing for me, is kind of getting in the nitty gritty of, pitch characteristics, what's effective right now, kind of tweaking my mix and being able to reinvent myself each and every year.
So you play for 3 different organizations, right? Cardinals, play for the Rockies, play for the Yankees, right? Are all the data types the same, right? Or are the Yankees have different data types and different data sets and different feeds than other organizations? Do one organization leverage that data more effectively than the others, that from your perspective? Or talk to me about the different data that you're getting in from different organizations and what each kind of like approach to it is.
So not only have the organizations been different in terms of scouting data and stuff, and also in development, things to look at. It's also that time has also elapsed, and so the whole league in general has evolved. When I first got with the Cardinals, they were big on throwing the ball down the zone, creating downward action on your pitches, getting ground balls. Pretty much that was the whole philosophy. They wanted every guy to pretty much do the same thing, and that was based on the fact that strategy was pretty effective for them for that period of time. It wasn't very effective for me, but I was kind of trapped in a system where, you're trying to impress your bosses. So you're trying to do what they tell you to do and perfect that as much as possible. But I always kind of knew in the back of my head, like, hey, maybe this isn't really my strength here. So that was like from a player development side. With those guys also, like from a scouting side, everything was kind of done by hand. There was these big binders that would come out and they'd kind of show you like, well, this is where he hits the ball. And the coaches would kind of dive into that data and they would say, hey, we think you can attack, this guy up in the zone, this guy down in the zone, this guy with more breaking balls, stuff like that. All right, fast forward to the Rockies. Get to the Rockies. Rockies also valued ground balls because they play in Coors Field, which is, a place where if the ball's in the air, you're in trouble. So that was something that they focused on initially. And then I think over my time period there, they kind of realized that, contact in and of itself was an enemy of a Rockies pitcher. They wanted to develop more strikeouts. So that's when they started seeking out pitchers who could, get more strikeouts. And I think that fit in well with me. That's always been my game. And I was able to tweak my pitch mix in the time that I was there, throwing a lot more breaking balls, kind of pitching backwards, if you will, doing some things there. By the time I rolled over to the Yankees, now you're talking about an analytic department that's 40 people strong, and they're investigating every single thing about pitching and about hitting and about fielding and about everything. So, on any given series, we have these little laminated cards that go on the catcher's wristband, helping him call the game. The position players have cards, so they know where to stand in the field to get the highest percentage chance of fielding the balls. I get a whole breakdown before the game of what's my best percentage pitches in every situation. So it's a lot more granular at this point. But also you see that, the Yankees have kind of figured out to look at the underlying pitching metrics, because I will say this, 10 years ago, if a guy did well, nobody cared how he did it. It was like, okay, maybe he'll keep going. But now they take a much more of a look at like the how you're getting people out, and is that sustainable? Yeah. And so the Yankees specifically are hunting certain types of pitchers, guys with one pitch that's super elite, that gets a lot of swing and miss and gets a lot of, strikeouts and that sort of thing. And they're looking to leverage a pitcher's unique trait as often as possible. And so that's how they go about figuring out who to get, because the Yankees kind of get whoever they want. So that's how they go about doing it. And I think that's a little bit of a difference than before. Like, they're not so much interested in past performance as in projecting future performance.
Yeah. No, that's the Yankees fan and you saying the Yankees can get whoever they want. The Yankees fan, the Yankees player, nothing ever changes. All right, so you got to cut ahead of where I want to get to, right, of pregame versus in-game. But let's take a step back. Let's talk about how much data are you actually given on like a daily, weekly, monthly basis, right? And like, how far does that data go back, right? Like, I'm assuming those feeds are like MLB feeds or Yankees feeds, right? But who gives you that data, right? How far does it go back? And more specifically, what tools do you use now to visualize that data, right, before the game starts, right? That's kind of, I think, is kind of unique to your situation.
Yeah, so in season. So right now, if we're going to play, say, Boston, we will get 2 printouts on Boston, as well as a video database of every single guy's, like, I will watch every single guy's last 25 at-bats versus right-handed pitchers. So there's a system called the BAT system, which is basically used by all 30 teams. The team's video people input everything that happens in the game into them. It's easy to look through, and then our video guys will compile that into a smaller folder. So, if I'm going to go watch JD Martinez hit his last 25 times against righties, I can kind of see where he's at right now and maybe pick some things out and watch him get out a little bit, so I have a little more confidence going into that at-bat that, hey, this guy's a human, he gets out. In terms of those printouts, we get one that's hyper-specific to me, where they give you a suggestion of first pitch, what to throw in a mid-count, and what to throw to finish a guy off for a strikeout. And they even weight them, like, so a fastball is a 10 out of 10 in this situation, and a slider is an 8 out of 10, and your cutter's only a 2. So an 8 is a very high score. So you could go either way depending on the situation between fastball, slider, but cutter, we don't recommend it. And so that's how they give you the specific data. And then you can also look at that same hitter, JD Martinez, versus all right-handed pitchers. So that's not as specific, but it is sometimes good to kind of look at the bigger picture and see, well, in general, he's a 2 out of 10 against changeup, for example.
Yeah.
So you kind of end up learning the opponents like inside and out through this process. Like, you're getting it on paper, but you're also getting it visually.
So I'm assuming Gary Sanchez is sitting behind home plate with a cheat card, right, looking at what pitch. How much of it is relying on that data, right, to trust him versus how much of it is a feel for, do you just trust that he's going to throw the right pitch, or do you have a specific feel based off the data that you've kind of crunched beforehand of what you're feeling at the time?
So, I mean, the wristband for the catcher is designed to allow him to call a high percentage success rate on each pitch, and it's not guaranteed that you're going to get success. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't even have to play the games. But, you know, ultimately, it allows him to be a little less, you know, stressed back there when he knows he has a statistically proven decent option here. It's my job to kind of be able to look into that batter's soul a little bit and understand, like, is this a guy who makes adjustments, or is he kind of who he is all the time? Yep. That is not an analytic thing, but that is something that you get through the video, kind of watching guys adjust to different stuff. And that's why, like, when I'm out there, I certainly trust that what's being called, because I know there's a lot of logic behind it. But, you know, we're allowed to go off the script, and from time to time you have to, because the game is kind of a combination of art and science. Like, certainly there are guys who have, like, say they have a weakness on an up and away fastball. Well, you know, that weakness will get closed down if you throw too many of them in a row. And I've gotten burned like that in the past, where it's like, okay, so the guy hits 083 on up and away fastballs over 94 miles an hour. So if I throw my best fastball up and away, I have a really good chance of success. But if I live there the whole at bat, and that guy chooses to change his swing a little bit and make an adjustment, I can get beat in that situation. So that's where I do think that there's a little bit of a time to sometimes have a little human feel, go off the script, and not be so predictable. But it certainly helps to have that information ahead, and it helps a lot with your confidence, because when you throw a pitch, you want to know that that pitch has a good chance of success.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was thinking about, is the confidence, right? You're sitting back there knowing that, hey, they've put the right stuff in front of you, they've crunched the numbers so much where I can throw this pitch with confidence, knowing it's going to give me the best percentage. So you mentioned Yankees got 40 guys on the analytics department, right? What are each of their roles? How involved with you are with them, right, to work with them to get those numbers, right, sit down with them, or are they just saying, hey, here you go? Do you work with them to kind of tweak your skill set, or how does that kind of work?
So they have a pretty good system. Obviously, there's a lot of guys working behind the scenes that we don't interact with every day that are investigating all different topics and creating these reports for us. But we have one guy, Zach, who works with us, who basically travels with the team at all times. He's the one who's kind of the middleman between the analytics department and us. So he's the one having the conversations. When I have a question about, you know, a certain way to attack, he's the guy I go talk to. We pull up all the data they have on their database, and, you know, we can dig into really any topic I have. And it's nice to have somebody who's there to kind of, you know, be a translator with some of the numbers. I know that for me, like, I'm pretty up to speed on this stuff, but a lot of guys aren't, and a lot of guys really need that person in the middle to help convince them, because we touched on it in the last question, but the ability to have full confidence and full conviction behind what you're throwing is a huge factor in success. And if you're kind of like on the fence about a pitch, you're just not going to throw it as effectively. So when you have somebody that can really get through to you and explain to you, you know, with confidence, like, this is what makes you great. You do this, you focus on this, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. That takes a lot of pressure off of a pitcher to feel like he has to tiptoe through and make all the right decisions all the time. So that's how they do it with us, and it's really nice that we have that kind of that middleman that, you know, helps us dig through the data, and that way we don't get too confused. We can go out there and be freed up and do our thing.
So you are a relief pitcher, right? So you come in probably for an inning max. You throw 2 pitches, maybe 3 max, right? So the analytics you have are really crunched in. Who in your mind has, like, probably the hardest job interpreting all this data coming in? Is it starting pitcher? Is it center fielder, shortstop, right? Catcher, right? Who is getting the most type of data, right? And, right, you are coming in probably more in intense, close situations where it really matters, right? Starting pitching is there per 6-7 innings maybe, right? So the analytics are probably more trending towards a longer period of time, right? Who in your mind, is it relief pitchers, closers, right? Who has probably the most data to sift through, and, you know, where does that trend last for the length of time?
The catchers. Catchers, I feel like a big league catcher is something that is unknown, that a lot of people don't realize is how mentally draining the games are for them, not just physically. Obviously, they're back there squatting, catching 95-mile-an-hour pitches and blocking and all that stuff, but they have to dig. They have to know the strengths and weaknesses of every one of their guys. They have to be able to read body language on the fly of their guys and really coach a lot of their guys through innings, because there's a lot of pitchers that won't shake, won't think for themselves out there. So they have to really take a lot of control, in every way. And it might even take away from their own offense, because it's so important for them to dig in on that defensive side of the ball. So I really admire the catchers that can handle that and, come out and do a great job. I do think the starting pitchers have a lot to digest as well, because when you're facing a guy multiple times in a game, there's a lot of adjustments that take place. But, they have 4 days in between starts to get up to speed on their next, group that they're facing. And they make a lot, like guys nowadays make a lot of adjustments in between innings. They'll get with the analytic guy and then look at the data real quick in between an inning and be able to make an educated guess for the next time that they have to go through the lineup. For us, it's actually pretty straightforward. I might face a batter twice in a series. So really, for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. Where I noticed that it ticks up is in the playoffs. All of a sudden you're in the playoffs. Last year I struggled in the playoffs, and I thought part of it was I was just a little overexposed. Like, I faced the same hitters like 4 or 5 times in a row, 4 games in a row against Houston. They have a much better view of what we're doing. So that's a time period where you might want to dig in a little harder, because they're digging in harder on you, and it becomes
what do you mean about that? They're digging a little harder on you with Houston.
Well, I mean, I'm not even going to talk about the cheating aspect, but it's just like when you're in a series where you're going to face guys over and over again, I think there's a lot more individual study on those relief pitchers. During the season, I think they study up on the starters. They know a little bit about the bullpen guys, but they're not digging into like the nth degree. But when they know in a playoff series, like George Springer's going to face me 5 times, he's going to dig into that.
All right. So we have the Q&A open for anyone who wants to ask questions. We had a couple of questions in the chat. All right. So question, do you find it hard to distill the signal from the noise in the data, right? So he said, how best you consume the insights from analytics and science, right? And how to kind of distill the signal from actual noise of the game, right? I think when I think of that, it's, for the love of the game, right? Where with Kevin Costner, right? And he kind of cues the mechanism. How much of that do you kind of have to like shut off any outside noise, including the data, and just kind of focus on what you're doing?
That's where preparation comes in. Like, basically for me, I always pre-plan the first pitch I'm going to throw to every batter I face that night. So I don't have to do that thinking when I get out there. That's already decided. And I can go out there and focus on my target and executing my pitch. And as the at-bat progresses, there's a feeling out process. But, a big part of pitching is having one clear thought in the moment, and really being able to lock in on your target and execute. And if you, clutter your mind with too much stuff, you're just not going to be as effective. Your attention's going to be divided. So that's why I'm saying that the preparation is what allows you to then kind of, zero in on what you need to handle in the moment.
John, I see you opened up your camera. Do you have a question?
Yeah. So curious about visualizations or dashboards. Like, I know that you alluded to earlier on, like, the scatter plot. It's like, hey, here's the heat map of, where I'm throwing balls and strikes, where my, the mix of my pitches are. Are there certain types of visualizations that either you find valuable or that some of the coaching staff might use, something that's sitting in the clubhouse, or do you have personal things that, maybe you've got like a monitor sitting in your living room that you kind of keep up throughout the season? You're watching your progress. Like, I might liken this to in a business. They've got, a big network operations center with TVs everywhere, and, they're charting and watching certain things. Like, is there something equivalent in your world that you use or the coaching staff uses?
I'm always paying attention to the game, and no matter who's pitching, and I feel like I'm always trying to read what's happening and visualize what I would do in that situation. I'm not very good at visualizing with my eyes closed, so I do some open eye visualization, and even like pre-practicing. Like, if I'm warming up in the bullpen and I know I'm facing a hitter next, I'm going to practice the pitches I know I'm going to throw to that guy. That's kind of a very simple way of kind of getting those mental reps in before you're doing the actual thing. But even just on a focus level, I mean, extreme focus is such an important part of pitching well. And to me, that's something that can be practiced. You know, the brain's a muscle. When I'm watching games, you know, from inside the clubhouse before I ever go out to the bullpen, I'm really practicing my ability to stay on that target all the way through a guy's pitch, and then I'm trying to pick up on body language in between pitches on hitters and all that little stuff. It's just those are little visual data points that you kind of file away. But certainly we do a lot of visualization. I mean, if I know I'm gonna throw a first pitch slider first strike to somebody, like I already kind of see the path of that pitch in my head long before I ever throw it.
So what about, we've talked a lot about kind of like in-game competition, right? For stuff like hitters, how they hit. What about stuff kind of outside of that, right? Umpires, weather, right? What other kind of, does that kind of come into the overall statistic output, or is that kind of separate of, hey, you know, these may have an effect, but it's not enough to kind of move it one way or the other? Do you still get that kind of data, or is that just kind of out there?
They give us always data on the umpires every night, kind of like what they call, what they don't call. You'll see some trends with different guys. You know, maybe they favor a little bit more of one of the corners than the other corner. You know, it's hard to always do that in the game, to kind of force it in an area because of that data. But there are some times where you kind of get the feeling like if I throw that pitch and it's a little off the corner and the batter doesn't swing, I think I'm going to get that call. And it's nice to kind of have that knowledge ahead of time. In terms of like weather and stuff, like I feel like that's something you can't let affect you too much, but there are some circumstances where, you know, experience has taught us some stuff. Like, so maybe when the shadows creep in a ballpark late in the day game, and the hitter's kind of maybe in the dark and you're in the sun, it's kind of been understood now by talking to a lot of hitters, like they have a really hard time picking up spin on breaking balls in that situation. So that's a situation where you maybe will lean a little harder on your breaking pitches. And that's just something that's come out of, you know, experience over time and guys passing that knowledge down.
And I'll get to that because it's someone I want to bring up. It's more player development. But I guess my last question around, you know, in-game competition, specifically to the Yankees, right? You talked about how the Cardinals had more of a philosophy towards pitching down in the zone, right? Just because that's how the team philosophy was. Do the Yankees have any philosophy or specifically towards analytics? Or is it just kind of like assume that this is the way it is?
Team philosophy is throw your best pitch as much as possible. So if you have a dominant pitch, throw it. Don't shy away from it. So obviously we have Aroldis Chapman, throws 100 miles an hour, he's going to throw his fast. You know, we have Zach Britton, he's got a great sinker, throw your sinker. I have a great slider, throw your slider. So it doesn't matter what it is. They have no specific philosophy except leverage your strengths as often as possible and basically adjust when you need to adjust, but for the most part, leverage your strengths.
Yep. All right, so that kind of gets into player development, right? That second half of data that you take in. You mentioned kind of like the spin rotation of a slider or a fastball. How do you track that spin? You know, what kind of data are you using to track that spin? How are the Yankees using it to be effective, right, in your player development into what pitch you should throw? Like, are they videotaping it? How do they kind of actually track that rotation? How do you visualize that data?
So this is all new. This is all new stuff, probably the last 3 or 4 years. So, you know, Tyler, like in the old days, if you're trying to work on a pitch, you go out and you play catch on the side. You try a bunch of different stuff. You get feedback from your partner. Hey, how's that look? How's that moving? You know, because it's hard to know what's happening. Your hand's moving so fast. It's hard to know what's happening at release. It's hard to know what the visual's like for the opponent of that pitch, but not anymore. Now we have systems like TrackMan, and there's portable ones called Rapsodo that when you throw a pitch, it'll give you the speed, the spin rate, which is how many revolutions it has per minute. It'll tell you the spin direction. So that's like, this would be like 180 degrees directly backspin. But like if you're spinning the ball like in a weird direction, it'll tell you what the direction is. It'll tell you what the spin efficiency is, which is the percent of the spin which is explained as the percentage of the spin that relates to the pitch's movement. So not all spin actually makes the ball move. If you throw a gyro pitch, which is otherwise known as bullet spin, so your ball spins like a bullet, that actually doesn't create any movement. If you shot a perfect rifle bullet straight baseball directly straight with perfect bullet spin, it would not move. It would go dead straight. So the spin efficiency is really useful for developing certain pitches. Like we've learned so much more through this data about what makes a good pitch great. And so like sliders, a lot of the best sliders in the game have a low spin efficiency, right around between 10 and 15%. So now when you're working behind the scenes on your slider, you're getting feedback on every single pitch on the spin efficiency. Oh, that's a little too high. That's a little too low. You're doing trial and error with your grip, with your release, until you get those metrics where you want. And then the real secret sauce that's finally gotten to the game as the technology's gotten good enough is the high-speed cameras. So now we have these high-speed cameras. I own one called an Edgertronic camera. It shoots like 2,000 frames per second. And you set it up right on your hand at release. So now when you have a good rep, you can see exactly how your hand interacted with that baseball as it came out of your hand to create the desirable effect on the pitch. And now you have something that you can practice. So basically you're looking for the good rep, and that gives you, then now you can practice it. So it really cuts back that feedback loop that we used to have of well, that looks good, keep trying that. This like tells you exactly what you're doing and makes it a lot easier to practice.
So so you threw in college, right? When you topped out 97 miles an hour, is it theoretically you could say, hey, I throw 97, but it's a straight or it's a low spin 97, so it's much easier to hit or time up, right?
Absolutely.
And so now
I can explain that. I can explain that a little bit.
Yeah.
So just real quick on a baseline. So basically, what happens is hitters face pitchers their whole lives, and basically it all becomes like data that their brain kind of digests, and they're able to anticipate where the ball is going to be based on what it looks like when it comes out of the hand, based on experience, and it all gets kind of aggregated into an average, and that's kind of what your expectation becomes as a hitter. So an average four-seam fastball has about 2,200 RPMs of spin on it. That's right in the death zone. I don't care if you throw 100 miles an hour, if your ball is about 2,200 RPM in that range, plus or minus 100 or 200 RPM, you're going to have a hard time them not squaring it up, because as long as they're on time, they have a very good expectation of where the ball is going to end up in relation to their swing path. So that's why now guys like Justin Verlander who have like 2,700 RPM fastballs, basically what happens there is the hitters they never understood why they were missing it. Why am I missing it? Why am I missing it? I feel like I'm right on it, but it's because that ball's resisting gravity a little bit better than what they're expecting. So when they go to swing, they just slice under the ball. And so that's kind of what we have learned over the years. And these metrics are for every type of pitch. We figured out like kind of what's good, what's not good. And in some cases, there's multiple things that's good. But with four-seam fastballs in particular, if you're in that death zone of RPMs, you're going to have a really hard time missing the bat.
So when someone says he has a sneaky fastball, right? He doesn't necessarily have a sneaky fastball. He's just got a very high rotation spin fastball that will come off as normal, but has a high rotation, so it comes off as like sneakier.
Like, back in the day, they would say this guy has a rising fastball, and we know that, that's not possible, but you would feel it. Like I remember I used to play catch with a guy, Rex Brothers, who was a pretty powerful relief pitcher for the Rockies, and he would throw me balls that my internal clock would tell me this ball's going to bounce, but then it wouldn't bounce, and I would catch it like around my shin level. And that's the type of thing, like it's just like it's kind of an illusion because of how much of an outlier that spin was. And so that's kind of what makes some guys so hard to hit.
Now, do you think, and this is just something I thought of, right? There's always been so much debate about like the baseball, right? And tighter round balls, higher seams. How much of your slider do you attribute to more on analytics on, because you look at your clips, right? It's almost like a wiffle ball out there at points where you're throwing it compared to, is it actually the physics of a baseball, you think? Or do you think it's because you're able to take in and ingest all of that data and know the right way to throw it, the best way to throw it, how to throw it You know what I'm saying, right? Like the physics versus the actual data behind it.
So in my case with my slider, what ended up kind of happening was, in college, going back to college and even early minor leagues, I threw like kind of a big curveball, and this slider pitch really isn't any different than that. It's just instead of trying to create the pitch with a north-south break, I'm trying to create an east-west break. And that was kind of something that I tried to implement in Double-A when they weren't swinging at my big breaking curveball anymore. So it's the same principle of how I threw the curveball, but it's my ability to create an above-average amount of spin combined with my lower arm slot and my cross-body throwing, which creates the unique release of the pitch. So a lot of times guys will ask me like, well, what's your grip? And they'll be able to like hold the ball the same way as me, and they have an ability to spin it at a high level. But because they don't have the same arm slot as me, the ball comes out at a different angle, and it's not the same. And so there's so many factors that go into what makes a pitch unique. But I think in my case with that pitch, my arm angle plays a big role in it, and that's why it's been hard for a lot of guys, I think, to recreate it. With other pitches, I'm building them off of the data, where I'm basically trying to reverse engineer another guy's pitch that has a similar arm slot, and then saying, well, that means I should be able to do this if I can figure out the grip and the proper mental cue and when throwing it. So it's a little bit of both, but ultimately the data will, there's some pitches that are out there that are just impossible to throw for every
Right.
guy. Like I can't throw a certain type of splitter just because of my arm action. It'll never be as good as another guy's because of my arm, the way my arm comes through. So, you have to kind of filter through that and figure out what works within, your set of variables. But the data is super helpful on that.
All right, we got a couple more questions and we'll wrap up. And, if anyone wants to ask any more, maybe non-data related questions, Adam, we'll do that at the end. I'll get another question in the chat I'm looking at right now. And John, if you want to pipe in with a question, I saw the video hop in. But let me ask this one real quick. So it says, curious how much personal data is tracked and merged into insights, right? Stuff like nutrition, sleep metrics, fitness metrics, right? It might be invasive, right? But could also help drive insights as factor. Do the Yankees take that into consideration, right? Or is that kind of more of a personal use for you?
This has been a battle kind of the last few years. Teams want to track a lot of that stuff, but a lot of the players have been reluctant because you're worried about how it's going to get used against you, down the line in contract negotiations, or if they see some sort of physical number trending in the wrong direction, they might cut bait on you at a different point. And so there's been a lot of protecting of that personal information by players.
Yeah.
A lot of guys will wear the whoops and things of that nature to kind of track themselves. And then, they have a relationship with the manager, and everybody can say, I'm low right now. I could use a day. It's nice to be a veteran and be able to go in and actually say that and have it be okay, and, take a day off and then come back, recharge the next day. So that stuff is certainly, they're certainly tracking it as much as they can, but I'd be lying if I would say that the players are fully complicit in that, because, there's a lot of fear about how the data could be used maybe negatively against them.
Yeah, I think that's not just limited to baseball, right? I think that's the big question that everyone has, right? As we're growing all this data and social feeds, right? Right, what is invasive, what's not invasive, what helps performance. The one last question or any more questions from the chat. John, do you have another question that you want to ask?
Yeah, two questions. First one, talk to me about like age of data. I think you alluded to this once with looking back at the last 25 at bats that maybe you faced a batter, just the batter's last 25 at bats. Like at what point is data deemed to be too old? It's like will you look back at, say, a previous season to gain metrics or information on either another batter or even on yourself? So like what degree is real-time data more relevant and, historical data deemed to be still relevant versus too old?
There's a balance there. I think like, early in the season, you're still looking at some data from the previous year mixed with some spring training data. trying to make the best, get the best info you can. But I do know that like when we get late into the season, they usually scrap a lot of the stuff from early in the year, and they try to be a little more specific on what guys are doing now, because guys do tend to change throughout the year, and that's a big part of the department too, is kind of monitoring opponents, hot and cold, and like maybe like when they see adjustments being made and how their swing might change or where they are. Some guys will change where they stand in the batter's box, and just a lot of different things happen. So there's a lot of monitoring that needs to happen from a distance so that you don't miss it and end up throwing a ball right into somebody's sweet spot just because you weren't paying attention to an adjustment they made. So you try to keep everything as recent as possible, but also build as much as possible, because you don't want to have too small of a sample either. Sometimes it's hard to learn from that. So like I said, we tend to watch the last 25 at bats. Like I can think of an example. A couple of years back, we were playing the Reds. Joey Votto is one of the best players of his generation, great hitter, but he was just playing terrible at the moment. And so we kind of picked up on that, and we were like, hey, like we can really attack this guy a lot more than typically. And we went right at him, and he didn't do anything for the first 2 games of the series. And so we stuck with it, ended up having like a 0 for series. He didn't get any hits against us. Whereas if we just went off of like long-term data, we probably would have been a lot more cautious with him, maybe walked him a few times, given them an opportunity to score more runs. So that's where kind of the recent trends can kind of influence your thinking.
Yeah, that's
last question from me.
Go ahead.
So I've got a cousin who, back when he was in med school back in the day, he and some of his fellow med students, they would watch some of these TV sitcoms, like Life in the ER and whatnot. And they're always trying to predict, like, okay, patient comes in with XYZ symptoms. They'd always been trying to predict, like, what's the diagnosis before the TV show would say what the diagnosis is. Is there anything similar to what you guys do in the big leagues as you're watching other games? This might be most specific during the playoffs if maybe your team's not playing. To what degree are you sitting there with other buddies, other teammates, and maybe especially the pitching staff? And we got full count, runners on the first and second. Knowing this pitcher, if I were in his shoes, I'd be throwing XYZ pitch, or I bet he's going to be doing this. Like, to what degree are you guys having some of that camaraderie? You're trying to predict the game, make some calls before they actually happen.
We do that constantly. We do that all the time, because that's education, that's continuing learning, that's helping each other. What do you see in this hitter? And a lot of that is swing paths. There are very distinct swing paths. There are guys that are short to the ball, and there are guys that are more of like an uphill swing, and that's stuff that you have to be able to identify really quickly as a major leaguer, because that's going to tell you a lot right there without even looking at the data. And so that's why, like, when a young guy comes up and we're talking in the bullpen, we're saying, you see how he swings there? You see that move right there? That tells you that this area is a little safer than this area. And, sometimes the really fun ones are like when you see a guy pitching against our team, and he's maybe facing one of our hitters and doing something that he shouldn't do. And you're like, oh my God, like they're going right into his strength. And I remember a really good example was when I was with the Rockies. Nolan Arenado was our best player. He was having a great game against the Giants. They could just not seem to ever get him out, because they just kept trying to pitch him inside. And he's one of the best inside hitters ever. And I don't know where they got the idea that was a good plan. But I remember he ended up hitting a walk-off home run to complete the cycle and beat the Giants.
I remember that. Yep.
In a game. And right before that happened, Buster Posey called a cutter inside from Melanson and set up inside first pitch. And we were all watching the game in the bullpen, and every guy in the bullpen was like, oh my God, he's going to throw it inside. And we just knew, like, he's going to hit this pitch. And sure
it was a
enough,
grand slam too, right?
Yeah.
It was a walk-up grand slam.
He hit a grand slam. And we were like, what is he thinking? Is he not watching? But that's when it's crazy, because like sometimes guys have bad information, and that's what leads into their their failure.
No, I think that's important, right? Like when it goes back to data, right, of what you're taking in, there's good information, there's bad information, right? And it's how you siphon the two. All right, so we're coming up to the end of the hour. I had a couple questions I want to ask you, non-data related, right? We'll do kind of like a rapid fire, and then we'll wrap up. All right, so baseball season's coming up. When do you report?
I did my intake testing yesterday, so I got my antibodies test, my COVID test yesterday. Waiting on the results. I was negative on antibodies, so assuming that all goes through well, then I believe tomorrow I have my regular physical, and then I'll be throwing on Thursday. So
is it going to be like the NBA where it's like, kind of like that Hotel California where you have to come in and you can't leave, or how is that going to work of being like exposed?
So baseball's trying to do a non-bubble thing here, which is very risky. I'm not sure how it's going to play out. There's a lot of trust that goes into this with other guys off the field and away from the ballpark, how they're going to conduct themselves. But we're going to be getting tested every other day. A lot of protocols at the field, a lot of distancing stuff, and a lot of, like, I know initially in camp, we're going to be coming in waves, so there's not a lot of us there at once. So a lot of different things that they're going to try. But, we're going to go for it. It's going to be a bizarro season, and I hope we make it. I hope we make it through.
I honestly think it's going to be awesome, right? 60-game season, right? It's almost like playoff baseball starting right now, where almost every game, every pitch matters, right? How different is it going to be, right? And what's your approach going to be to the new season?
If you really think about it, like pretty much every game is almost worth what a whole series would be worth previously. So the games are going to be very intense. They're going to be very valuable. I'm sure that us in the bullpen, we're going to pitch a lot. My thing is just to attack from day one. Don't ease into it. Try to go at it and be my best right from the first day, and try to get the wins early, because a fast start's going to make a big difference. We've never experienced anything like this. The only thing I can think of is college baseball, where you have 50, 60 games, and every game feels so important. So it's going to be different, but we're looking forward to it.
I don't know if that midweek game versus Hartford was really that important here in our season. All right, last couple of questions. I know there's some pace of play changes to the rules, right? I think you have to face a minimum of 3 batters now. What are your thoughts on like the new pace of play change and pace of play in general with baseball?
I'm not a big pace of play guy. I don't think it makes a huge difference. For me, I feel like baseball is the one sport without the clock. It's kind of nice. Mm-hmm. I do think sometimes the game can be slow and drag quite a bit when guys take too long between pitches, but I don't know. It's delicate. I know, from the player perspective, if you want to take a little extra time, it's usually because you really want to make sure you have success. So rushing could mess you up. And I think that's the kind of the push-pull there. 3 batter minimum this year is going to be different for us in terms of strategy, but I embrace it. I mean, your job is to be better than the other guys so you can keep playing in this league. So I just feel like it's the same problem for everybody, and just try to be on the right side of that.
Last question, and I think it's kind of unique, right? We talk about technology and data, right? Obviously, instant replay has been more and more prevalent, and there's been talks about even replacing umpires, right, with just a strike zone. Do you ever think there will be a day where that happens? I know they're kind of they're testing out in the minors, right? Do you think that's a good thing, bad thing? Obviously, you can debate between the two, but I think it's an interesting question to ask as technology advances, how much is it going to encroach on the actual game?
I do think we're heading to the robot strike zone. I do, just because, if you really think about it, strikes and balls and strikes are really the biggest factor in determining a game. Mm-hmm. That's where the most inflection points are. And for me, I do think we're heading that direction. The thing that worries me about it is it's going to change the catching position a lot. It's not, there's a lot of nuance in the catching position in terms of framing pitches, presenting pitches as strikes. That's going to not matter anymore, and they're going to have guys just much more ready to throw and block, and it's just going to be a different game. So I'm not sure how much I support it yet. I do think it would benefit pitchers quite a bit, the robot strike zone.
Yep.
But I don't know. I mean, when it happens, we'll deal with it then. As for now, I kind of like the human element of the game, me personally, but I can see why they want to go that direction, because it might make a little more of a fair experience.
Yep. I agree. All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour now. I appreciate you hopping on. This is cool. I think it's something unique that our customers will enjoy listening to, right? Data analytics, right? How it gives you a competitive advantage, players a competitive advantage. Really appreciate you hopping on. Good luck this season. Johnny, you got anything else to add?
Nothing else. Thanks so much for joining us, Adam. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
Appreciate it, man. We'll talk to you soon, bud.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Later.